The evening shadows stretched across their bedroom as Michael stood in the doorway watching Sarah prepare for bed. Her practiced movements, face cream applied, hair brushed, pajamas buttoned, had become as predictable as what would follow. For 31 nights since their wedding, he had approached her with tender words and gentle touches. For 31 nights, she had turned away. "Not tonight," she whispered, her voice carrying neither regret nor warmth. "I'm tired." The same words, the same distant eyes that had once looked at him with apparent adoration during their whirlwind courtship. Michael retreated to his side of the bed, the growing hollow in his chest expanding with each rejection. What had changed between their passionate engagement and this cold, mechanical marriage? The question gnawed at him as he stared at the ceiling, separated from his wife by mere inches and endless distance. Michael traced his finger along the silver frame on the dresser, wiping away a thin layer of dust that had gathered since he'd last picked it up. Their wedding photo. Sarah in ivory lace, her smile radiant, her hand clutching his arm as if he were an anchor in a storm of joy. He remembered the day with perfect clarity. The scent of lilies, the golden afternoon light streaming through stained glass, the weight of her ring as he slipped it onto her finger. "I, Sarah, take you, Michael, to be my husband," she had said, her voice clear and unwavering, "to have and to hold from this day forward." 3 months. That's all it had taken from their first meeting at his colleague's dinner party to standing at the altar. When you know, you know. Isn't that what everyone said? And he had known, felt it in his bones when she laughed at his jokes, when she listened intently to his stories, when she seemed to see him in a way no one else ever had. Michael set the photo down with a gentle click against the wood. From the bathroom came the sounds of Sarah's nightly routine. Water running, cabinet closing, the soft padding of her feet on tile, the same sounds that now preceded her inevitable rejection. He glanced at the wedding photo once more. Something about her eyes in the picture caught his attention differently tonight, a certain calculation he hadn't noticed before, or perhaps he was just seeing what he needed to see, finding retrospective clues to explain the baffling transformation from the woman who couldn't wait to marry him to the stranger who now shared his home but nothing else. Sarah emerged from the bathroom, her silk pajamas buttoned to the neck despite the warm evening. Michael looked up from his book, watching as she moved to her side of the bed, her back to him, as she arranged her pillows with practiced precision. "I was thinking," he said, setting his book aside, "maybe we could go away this weekend. That bed and breakfast in the mountains you liked in the photos, it might be nice to have some time just for us." Sarah glanced over her shoulder, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "That sounds lovely, but I have that charity committee meeting on Saturday, remember? Perhaps another time." Always another time. Always another reason. Michael edged closer, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "Sarah, is everything okay? Between us, I mean." She turned slightly, her expression softening into something that resembled concern. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" "Well, it's been over a month since our wedding, and we haven't—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You always seem to have a reason why we can't be intimate." "I've been tired, that's all." She patted his hand, then smoothly removed it from her shoulder. "It's been a big adjustment, moving in together, getting used to married life. But before the wedding—" "Michael, please." Her voice took on an edge. "Not everything has to be about that. There's more to marriage than physical intimacy." He withdrew, the familiar ache of rejection settling in his chest. "I know there's more. That's exactly my point. I feel like we're roommates, not husband and wife." Sarah sighed, reaching to turn off her bedside lamp. "You're overthinking this. Let's just get some sleep." In the darkness, Michael stared at the ceiling, listening to Sarah's breathing. It never deepened into the rhythm of sleep. He'd noticed that too. She lay awake, maintaining the pretense, keeping the careful distance between them. This wasn't tiredness. This wasn't adjustment. This was deliberate, consistent, and increasingly impossible to ignore. The warmth he'd once felt from her had been replaced by a calculated performance of affection, enough to maintain appearances, but never enough to truly connect. Dawn filtered through the blinds, painting stripes of pale gold across the empty side of the bed where Sarah should have been. Michael hadn't heard her leave, another pattern he'd noticed. She was always up and gone before he woke, returning home precisely at dinner time, their conversations limited to pleasant but superficial exchanges about their days. He sat up, rubbing his face with his hands. On the bedside table, their wedding photo stared back at him, a duplicate of the one on the dresser. Sarah had insisted they needed one in every room. "To always remember our promises," she'd said. Promises. The word hung in his mind as he picked up the frame. Marriage was a covenant, not just a contract. That's what the minister had said during their counseling session, a covenant built on honesty, vulnerability, and genuine connection. Whatever was happening in his marriage, those elements were conspicuously absent. Michael placed the photo face down on the table, the small act of defiance feeling strangely liberating. For weeks, he'd been making excuses, telling himself things would improve, that Sarah just needed time. But the carefully maintained distance, the practiced evasions, the hollow affection, none of it was accidental. It was time to stop pretending, time to demand the truth, whatever it might be. Tonight, when Sarah returned home, he would confront her directly. No more gentle questions easily deflected. No more accepting vague reassurances. Tonight, he would find out what his marriage actually was. Michael moved through his morning routine with mechanical precision, the coffee maker gurgling as he straightened his tie in the hallway mirror. The house felt unnaturally quiet without Sarah, who had left before dawn with a note on the counter about an early meeting. He stared at his reflection, rehearsing fragments of what he might say tonight. Direct but not accusatory. Firm but not threatening. His hand trembled slightly as he smoothed his collar, the wedding band catching the morning light. "I need to understand what's happening between us," he whispered to his reflection, testing the words, too vague. "I can't continue living like this." Too dramatic. On the hallway table, next to his keys, lay the leather-bound journal they'd received as a wedding gift. "For writing your journey together," the card had said. Its pages remained blank, a pristine testament to a story never begun. Michael picked up his briefcase, its weight suddenly substantial in his hand. The confrontation looming before him carried equal weight. The possibility of painful truth balanced against the certainty of continued deception. As he locked the door behind him, Michael felt an unexpected calm settle over him. Whatever came tonight, at least the pretense would end. At least they would finally have something real between them, even if that reality was unraveling. The dining room was bathed in the warm glow of candles when Michael arrived home. Sarah had prepared dinner, his favorite pasta dish, and greeted him with a kiss on the cheek, more affection than she'd shown in weeks. "What's the occasion?" he asked, setting his briefcase down. "Do I need an occasion to make dinner for my husband?" Her smile seemed practiced, her movements choreographed as she poured wine into crystal glasses. Wedding gifts they'd never used until tonight. They ate in relative silence, Sarah occasionally asking about his day, Michael providing brief answers while gathering his resolve. When she began clearing the plates, He reached for her wrist, gently but firmly stopping her. "Sarah, we need to talk." She stilled, then carefully set the plates back down. "About what?" "About us. About what's been happening since we got married." Michael met her eyes directly. "About why you've rejected any intimacy between us for 32 consecutive nights. You've been counting?" A flash of something, irritation perhaps, crossed her face before her expression smoothed. "I didn't need to count to know something's wrong. This isn't just about physical intimacy. It's about connection, honesty." "Michael, you're making too much of this." "No, I'm not." His voice remained steady. "Something changed the moment we said our vows. I need to understand why." Sarah's demeanor shifted suddenly, her posture stiffening as she pushed back from the table. "I don't owe you explanations about my body." "This isn't about owing. My body, my choice," she cut in, her voice sharp. "You have no right to demand anything from me." The prepared words died in Michael's throat, shock replacing determination. "Sarah, I'm not demanding. I'm asking why. Because I don't want to." She stood abruptly, knocking her wineglass over. Red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth like blood. "Is that clear enough for you? I don't want to, and I don't have to explain myself." She stormed from the room, leaving Michael stunned in the candlelight, the calculated warmth of dinner replaced by the cold reality of her words. Not exhaustion, not adjustment, simple deliberate rejection, and something in her rehearsed response suggested this had been the plan all along. Hours later, Michael sat alone in the darkened living room. Sarah had locked herself in the guest bedroom after their confrontation, refusing further discussion. The house had fallen into a heavy silence that seemed to press against his ears. He rubbed his temples, replaying her words, her tone, the practiced way she'd delivered what felt like a prepared statement. This wasn't an emotional reaction to pressure. It was a position she'd been ready to defend. A soft chime broke the silence. Sarah's phone, left on the coffee table in her hasty retreat. A notification illuminated the screen briefly before fading to black. Michael glanced toward the hallway, then back at the phone. He had never invaded her privacy before. The thought of doing so now made him uncomfortable, a moral line he'd never imagined crossing. Yet the calculated coldness of her response, the sudden shift from apparent affection to hostile defensiveness. Another chime, another notification. Michael picked up the phone. It wasn't locked. Sarah had never bothered with passwords between them. "Nothing to hide," she'd said once, though now the words felt hollow. He opened her messages, feeling a mix of guilt and grim determination. A conversation with someone named Jen caught his eye, messages from earlier that day. "How's the plan going?" Jen had asked. Sarah's response made his blood run cold. "As expected. He finally confronted me tonight about the physical stuff. I used the body autonomy line we discussed." He looked devastated. Jen, how much longer do you think you need to wait? Sarah, just until the assets transfer. Contract says 60 days minimum. Then I can start the next phase. Michael set the phone down, his hands trembling. Contract, assets, plan. The words swirled in his mind like fragments of a nightmare he was only beginning to comprehend. This wasn't just rejection. This was calculation. This was strategy. This was betrayal. Michael awoke to the unexpected aroma of coffee and bacon. Sarah stood in the doorway of their bedroom, a breakfast tray balanced in her hands, her smile tentative. "Good morning," she said, crossing to his side of the bed. "I thought you might like breakfast before work." Michael sat up slowly, watching her set the tray across his lap. Fresh squeezed orange juice, perfectly cooked eggs, even a small vase with a flower from their garden, a peace offering carefully constructed. "Thank you," he said, his voice neutral as he reached for the coffee. Sarah perched on the edge of the bed, her hand briefly touching his arm. "About last night, I was tired and stressed. I shouldn't have snapped at you." Michael nodded, observing the calculated warmth in her eyes, recognizing the performance for what it was. The text messages he'd seen cast her actions in a harsh new light. Every gesture now seemed part of a greater strategy. "We all have bad moments," he offered, matching her superficial tone while his mind raced. "I was thinking we could go away this weekend," she continued, smoothing the bedspread. "That place in the mountains you mentioned, just the two of us." "That sounds nice," Michael said, noting how she'd shifted from rejecting to initiating the very trip he'd suggested earlier. "Let me check my calendar at work." Sarah beamed, leaning forward to kiss his cheek before standing. "I'll let you eat in peace." As she left the room, Michael set down his fork, appetite gone. Behind her retreating figure, he could almost see the invisible strings of manipulation, the careful recalibration of her approach now that confrontation had failed. After Sarah left for her charity committee meeting, Michael sat at his desk in the home office, mind churning with questions. The messages mentioned assets and a contract, terms that demanded investigation. He opened their shared file cabinet, methodically working through folders labeled with Sarah's neat handwriting: tax documents, insurance policies, the deed to their house, all joint accounts established after the wedding. An unmarked folder caught his eye. Inside lay their prenuptial agreement, a document he'd signed without much thought, trusting Sarah's explanation that it was standard protection for both of us. Now, he read it line by line, professional experience as a contract analyst suddenly relevant to his personal life. Most provisions seemed standard until he reached Section 7.3. In the event of dissolution within the first year, all jointly acquired assets shall revert to original ownership status unless evidence of fraud or misrepresentation can be documented. Michael frowned, pulling out their financial statements. Joint accounts had been established immediately after the wedding. His considerable savings, inherited from his grandparents and earmarked for their future children's education, had been transferred into them at Sarah's suggestion. "For tax purposes," she'd said. He checked the dates carefully. The 60-day mark mentioned in Sarah's text would be next week, the minimum time required for the transfers to be considered legally complete and irreversible without lengthy litigation. Next, he found their investment portfolio. Sarah had become unusually interested in their retirement accounts after the engagement, suggesting changes that had seemed reasonable at the time. Now, examining the updated beneficiary forms, he noticed all contingent beneficiaries had been removed, leaving Sarah as the sole recipient. Michael sat back, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. This wasn't just about rejection or control. This was a carefully orchestrated financial strategy, with their marriage serving as the legal vehicle. His chest tightened as the implications crystallized. Not a wife, but a predator. Not a marriage, but a transaction. The setting sun cast long shadows across the office as Michael continued his investigation. Sarah had texted that her committee meeting was running late, buying him unexpected time. Rather than relief, he felt a strange, hollow acceptance. Each discovery only confirmed what he now suspected. He turned to her laptop, left charging on the desk. Like her phone, It wasn't password protected between them. Nothing to hide, she'd claimed. The irony wasn't lost on him. Opening her email, he found a folder labeled Personal that contained correspondence with someone named Rachel. The most recent exchange made his blood run cold. Rachel: when are you planning to execute the exit strategy? Sarah: as soon as the 60-day transfer window closes. The prenup is clear. Without fraud evidence, he can't touch anything in the joint accounts after that. The market's already recovering from the dip, so his investments are looking better than expected. Rachel: what if he contests the divorce? Sarah: he won't have grounds. I've documented everything. No abuse, no infidelity on my part. The physical rejection strategy works perfectly, keeps him frustrated, but gives him no legal claims. Marriage is just a contract, and I've followed every clause to the letter. Rachel: brilliant as always. The firm should give you a bonus for this one. Sarah: they already have. This is my 5th successful asset acquisition through marriage. But I think I'll take a break after this one. Maybe that villa in Spain we talked about. His grandfather's inheritance should cover it nicely. Michael closed the laptop, a strange calm replacing the shock. The final piece had fallen into place. Sarah wasn't just manipulating their marriage. This was her profession, her specialty. He was merely the latest target. He reached for his phone, scrolling to a contact he'd never imagined needing: Anderson Blake, family law specialists. His finger hovered over the number momentarily before pressing call. The covenant of marriage had been reduced to paper promises. Now he needed paper protections. The law offices of Anderson Blake occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower downtown. Michael sat across from Eleanor Blake, family law specialist, as she reviewed the evidence he'd gathered. On the polished mahogany desk between them lay printouts of emails, financial documents, and the prenuptial agreement, the paper trail of deception. "This is quite extraordinary," Eleanor said, looking up from Sarah's emails. "I've seen many dissolution cases involving financial manipulation, but rarely with this level of premeditation." Michael nodded, his wedding ring catching the morning light as he turned it absently on his finger. "What are my options?" "The prenuptial agreement actually works in your favor," Eleanor explained, tapping Section 7.3. "This fraud clause is ironclad. With this evidence, we can file for immediate dissolution and asset recovery." She pulled out a formal document with the state seal. "This is the petition. Once signed, there's no turning back." Michael stared at the document. Just 3 months ago, he'd signed marriage certificates with hopeful certainty. Now another signature would legally sever those vows. "Will this be public?" he asked. "Court records are generally public," Eleanor confirmed. "With these allegations, there may be interest from her professional circles. Are you prepared for that?" Michael thought of Sarah's calculated deception, her professional pride in manipulating him. "I'm not seeking vengeance, but the truth needs to come out." He reached for the pen, his hand steady as he signed his name in deliberate strokes. The weight of the moment pressed upon him, ending what had never truly existed, yet mourning what might have been. "We'll file today," Eleanor said, a note of compassion in her professional tone. "The court date will be expedited given the circumstances." 2 weeks later, Michael sat at the plaintiff's table in courtroom 3B, Eleanor beside him, arranging documents with practiced efficiency. Across the aisle, Sarah conferred with her own attorney, her demeanor composed, dressed immaculately in a conservative navy suit. She'd been served the dissolution papers at her office, a strategic decision by Eleanor to prevent document destruction. According to the process server, Sarah had received them with surprising calm, as if she'd been preparing for this possibility. Judge Harriet Wilson entered, and the proceedings began with formal introductions. Michael noticed how Sarah maintained a perfect mask of dignified confusion, occasionally casting wounded glances his way, performing for the judge. "Your Honor," Eleanor began, "this is an unusual case involving documented fraud. The respondent entered this marriage with premeditated intent to acquire my client's assets through deception." Sarah's attorney objected immediately. "Your Honor, these are baseless accusations. My client entered this marriage in good faith." Judge Wilson adjusted her glasses. "I'll hear the evidence." Eleanor methodically presented the case, the prenuptial agreement, the financial transfers, the systematic rejection pattern. When she introduced the emails between Sarah and Rachel, a visible ripple passed through the courtroom. "Miss Shelton," the judge addressed Sarah directly after reading the emails, "these communications appear quite damning. Do you dispute their authenticity?" Sarah's composure finally cracked. She whispered urgently to her attorney, who requested a brief recess. The judge denied it. "Your Honor," Sarah's attorney tried a new approach, "my client's personal communications have been taken out of context." "The context seems remarkably clear," Judge Wilson interrupted, reviewing the prenuptial agreement. Section 7.3 explicitly addresses fraud. Mr. Anderson has provided compelling evidence. The judge turned to Sarah. "Ms. Shelton, are you aware that what these emails describe constitutes not just grounds for dissolution, but potentially criminal fraud?" Sarah's face drained of color as the professional consequences became apparent. Her attorney whispered urgently in her ear. "In light of this evidence," Judge Wilson continued, "I'm granting the dissolution and enforcing the fraud clause of the prenuptial agreement. All transferred assets will revert to Mr. Anderson. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review." Michael sat motionless as the judge's gavel fell, watching Sarah's carefully constructed facade crumble. Colleagues from her firm who had come to support her now edged away, phones already out, damage control in progress. Justice had been swift and complete. So why did victory feel so hollow? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Michael sat alone on a bench outside the courthouse. The stone steps bustled with people coming and going, life continuing its normal rhythm, while his had been fundamentally altered. His phone buzzed continuously with notifications. Friends and family who'd been at the courthouse offering support. Colleagues expressing shock at the revelations. Sarah's professional reputation was in tatters. Her firm had already issued a statement, severing all association with her. Eleanor approached, briefcase in hand. "That was as decisive a victory as I've seen," she said, sitting beside him. "The assets should be restored within days. Financially, you'll be as if this never happened." Michael nodded, staring at his wedding ring, still on his finger despite everything. "Financially," he echoed. "I know it doesn't feel like a victory," Eleanor said gently. "It rarely does." "I keep thinking about the minister's words at our wedding," Michael said, "about marriage being a covenant, not just a contract. I thought we were building something sacred, but to her, it was just business." "What will you do now?" Eleanor asked. Michael slipped the ring from his finger, holding it in his palm like a small, heavy truth. "I don't know. Winning doesn't feel like healing." He closed his hand around the ring. Legal justice had been served, but the deeper wounds remained untouched by the court's ruling. A week after the court proceedings, Michael's house stood silent around him. Unopened mail accumulated on the entryway table. Unwashed dishes filled the sink. Blinds remained drawn against the spring sunshine. The expansive home that had once represented his dreams now felt like an empty shell, each room haunted by what never was. His phone lay face down on the coffee table, battery long dead. Too many messages, too many well-meaning friends and family members wanting to check in. He couldn't bear their concern, their questions, their attempts to frame his experience with platitudes about dodging bullets and silver linings. Michael moved from couch to bed to shower with mechanical precision, going through motions without purpose. He'd won, hadn't he? His assets were protected, Sarah's deception exposed. Justice had been served, so why did he feel like the one who'd lost? In the bedroom mirror, a stranger stared back, unshaven, hollow-eyed, diminished. Was this what Sarah had seen in him? A mark, a means to an end, nothing more. After years of believing himself a good judge of character, how had he missed such fundamental deception? "How could you be so blind?" he asked his reflection, voice rusty from disuse. The wedding photo still lay face down on the bedside table. He couldn't bring himself to dispose of it, nor to look at it again. It represented neither what was, nor what might have been, but rather what had never existed at all. The doorbell rang, breaking the silence. Michael ignored it, as he had for days. Then it rang again, insistent, and again, and again. Someone wasn't taking silence for an answer. The persistent ringing finally drove Michael to the door. He opened it to find David, his former college roommate and best man, standing on the porch with 2 grocery bags and a determined expression. "You look terrible," David said, pushing past him into the house. "And it smells worse in here than our dorm room after finals week." Michael stood motionless in the open doorway. "I'm not really up for company." "Good thing I'm not company." "I'm family." David moved purposefully toward the kitchen, flicking on lights and opening blinds as he went. "And you're not answering your phone." Michael closed the door, following reluctantly. "There's nothing to say." "There's plenty to say." David unpacked groceries, bread, coffee, fresh fruit. "But first, you're going to shower while I make food and air this place out." "I don't need—" "Michael." David stopped, facing him directly. "I've known you 20 years. I was there when your parents died. I was there when you made partner. I was your best man. And I'll be damned if I stand by while you disappear into yourself." Something in David's steady gaze cracked Michael's carefully constructed isolation. His shoulders sagged. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked, the question emerging from somewhere deep and wounded. "Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my judgment, it was all wrong." David's expression softened. "No, it wasn't. Your judgment was fine for the previous 38 years of your life. You met one exceptional liar who targeted you specifically. That doesn't erase who you are." "I feel used, disposable." The admission hurt physically. "You were used," David agreed, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But you were never disposable. Not to me. Not to everyone who's been trying to reach you." He gestured toward the darkened house. "This isolation, it's what she'd want. Don't give her that power, too." The words landed with unexpected weight. Michael hadn't considered that his withdrawal might be another victory for Sarah. "Shower," David said gently. "Food after. Then we talk." 2 days later, Michael sat in Dr. Abernathy's waiting room, leafing through a magazine without seeing the pages. David's intervention had broken through his isolation, but the deeper wounds remained, wounds that required professional help. The office door opened, and a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes appeared. "Michael, I'm Dr. Abernathy. Please come in." The therapy room was warm and inviting. Comfortable chairs, soft lighting, bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes. Michael sat stiffly, hands clasped, feeling both relieved and apprehensive. "So," Dr. Abernathy began after introductions, "what brings you here today?" Michael had rehearsed this moment, yet found himself struggling. "My marriage ended. It wasn't real." The inadequacy of these words struck him. "Tell me what not real means to you," she encouraged. Slowly, haltingly at first, then with increasing clarity, Michael shared his story: the whirlwind romance, the systematic rejection, the discovered deception. Dr. Abernathy listened without interruption, her gaze steady and compassionate. When he finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "What you've experienced is a profound betrayal of trust. It's natural to question your judgment, your worth, even your understanding of reality." "How do I trust myself again?" Michael asked. "How do I trust anyone?" "That's work we'll do together," she replied. "But I want you to consider something. In your darkest moment, you still had the wisdom to reach out for help. That shows remarkable strength." "It doesn't feel like strength," Michael admitted. "True strength isn't about being invulnerable," Dr. Abernathy said. "It's about continuing forward with dignity despite your wounds. You're doing that right now." Michael felt something shift slightly within him. Not healing, not yet, but perhaps the precondition for it. The recognition that his response to betrayal might matter more than the betrayal itself. "Same time next week?" he asked. Dr. Abernathy smiled. "I'll be here. And Michael, the path you're choosing, it takes courage." He nodded, standing to leave. The way forward wasn't clear yet, but for the first time since the courthouse, it felt like there might be one. "I've been thinking about what you said last week," Michael said, settling into the familiar chair in Dr. Abernathy's office. 6 weeks of therapy had made the space feel like a sanctuary of honesty. "About patterns," Dr. Abernathy nodded encouragingly. "What patterns are you noticing?" "I keep wondering why I didn't see the warning signs with Sarah." Michael leaned forward. "But looking back, there were moments that felt off. Her intense interest in my financial portfolio before we married. How she always had a ready explanation for everything. How she'd deflect questions about her past relationships. And what did you do when those moments occurred?" Michael paused, the realization dawning. "I rationalized them away. I told myself I was overthinking things, that perfect people don't exist." "Why do you think you did that, Doctor?" Abernathy's question was gentle but pointed. "Because," Michael's voice caught, "because I wanted to believe I'd found someone who truly saw me. After my parents died, there was this emptiness, a sense that no one really knew me anymore." Dr. Abernathy nodded. "So you were vulnerable to someone who seemed to fill that void." "I gave her the benefit of every doubt because I wanted her to be real." "That's not weakness, Michael. That's humanity." She set her notepad aside. "The capacity for trust is actually strength. Sarah exploited that strength, but it doesn't make the quality itself flawed." Something shifted in Michael's understanding, not just of what had happened, but of his role in it. He had been manipulated, yes, but his openness to connection wasn't the problem. "The next question, Doctor," Abernathy said, "is how to trust wisely rather than not at all." The community center conference room held 6 people seated in a circle, coffee cups and water bottles on the table before them. Michael had resisted the support group idea initially. Strangers sharing intimate pain seemed impossibly uncomfortable, but Dr. Abernathy's gentle persistence had eventually won out. "I never thought I'd be taken in by a romance scammer," Linda, a woman in her 60s, was saying. 30 years as a bank manager, and I fell for a man who only existed in emails and phone calls. "It's not about intelligence," Robert replied. "My ex-wife convinced me she was terminally ill to get me to liquidate my retirement fund. Doctors, medical records, all fabricated." As each person shared, Michael felt a strange relief washing over him. These weren't gullible people. They were humans who had encountered exceptional deception. When his turn came, Michael surprised himself with his candor. "The hardest part isn't the money or even the humiliation. It's wondering if I can ever trust my own judgment again." "I felt that way for months," said Elena, whose business partner had systematically embezzled from her. "But eventually I realized my capacity for trust wasn't the problem. It was choosing what evidence to ignore." Heads nodded around the circle, a silent acknowledgement of shared wisdom, hard-earned. "The betrayal doesn't define you," Robert said. "How you rebuild does." The Saturday farmers' market had become part of Michael's healing routine. Fresh air, community, simple pleasures reclaimed. He was examining heirloom tomatoes when a familiar voice froze him in place. "Michael?" He turned to find Sarah standing before him, elegant in a simple sundress, her expression a perfect blend of hesitant hope and contrition. 3 months had passed since the courtroom. "Sarah," his voice remained steady, though his heart raced. "This is unexpected. I've been trying to find the courage to reach out." Her eyes glistened with what appeared to be unshed tears. "What happened? I know words aren't enough, but I'm truly sorry." Michael observed her carefully, noting the familiar performance, the vulnerable posture, the precisely calibrated emotion. Once, it would have bypassed his defenses completely. "Why are you here, Sarah?" he asked quietly. "Things have been difficult." She glanced down. "My firm fired me. I've been blacklisted in the industry. The DA is still investigating." She looked up with a trembling smile. "I realize now what I threw away, what we could have had if I'd been honest." "What we could have had," Michael repeated, the words hollow. "We could still have something," she said, stepping closer. "Different, but real this time. I've changed, Michael." Hitting bottom changes a person. Around them, the market continued its cheerful bustle, oblivious to the drama unfolding by the vegetable stand. Michael felt strangely calm, seeing through the performance to the desperation beneath. "I have an apartment near here," she continued. "Nothing fancy, but we could talk. I could explain everything, answer any questions you have." Michael studied her face. Beautiful, calculating, now tinged with genuine fear as her options dwindled. Some part of him felt compassion for her predicament, but it no longer clouded his judgment. "No, Sarah." His voice was firm but not unkind. "I don't need explanations or answers anymore. What I need is to move forward without you in my life." Her expression shifted, desperation breaking through the facade. "Please, Michael, you don't understand how bad things are." "I understand completely," he interrupted gently. "And I wish you well. But there's nothing for you here." Sarah's face hardened, the mask slipping entirely. "You'll regret this. You think you're better than me, but you're not." Michael placed the tomato back in the display. "Goodbye, Sarah." As he walked away, he felt her desperate gaze following him, not with love or remorse, but with the dawning realization that her last potential lifeline was slipping beyond reach. The pounding on Michael's front door came just after 9 on a Tuesday evening. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the forceful, irregular rhythm suggested urgency. When he opened the door, Sarah stood on his porch, rain-soaked and disheveled, a stark contrast to her typically immaculate appearance. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice unsteady. "Please." Michael hesitated, then stepped back, allowing her entry but keeping the door open. The living room lights revealed what the porch shadows had concealed. Sarah's designer clothes were rumpled, her makeup smudged, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "You were right to walk away at the market," she said, hands trembling. "I wasn't being honest even then, but I am now. They're pressing charges, Michael. Criminal fraud. My assets are frozen. I could go to prison." She moved toward him, her composure crumbling. "You're the only person who could help. If you'd speak to the DA, tell them I've changed." "Sarah," Michael interrupted gently. "I have nowhere else to go," she continued, voice breaking. "My family won't talk to me. My friends, they weren't real friends. You're the only decent person I've known in years." Michael observed her carefully, noting the genuine fear beneath the performance. This wasn't the calculated Sarah who had manipulated him. This was someone facing the consequences of her actions for perhaps the first time. "Please," she whispered, tears falling freely now. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you, help me." Michael took a deep breath, weighing his response. The easy answer would be dismissal, a justified rejection after all she'd done. But something deeper stirred within him as he looked at the broken woman before him. "Sit down, Sarah," Michael said, gesturing to the armchair across from the sofa. He maintained a deliberate distance as he took his seat. She perched on the edge of the chair, tension visible in every line of her body. "Thank you for listening." "I'm not going to speak to the DA," Michael said, his voice gentle but firm. "What you did wasn't just to me. It was a pattern. Your fifth asset acquisition through marriage, according to your own emails." Sarah flinched at hearing her words quoted back to her. "I know, but people can change. I've changed." "Maybe you have," Michael acknowledged. "But that change needs to come from within you, not from fear of consequences." "So you're just going to let me go to prison?" A flash of the old Sarah, manipulative, accusatory. "I'm not letting you do anything. These are the natural results of your choices." Michael's tone remained measured. "But I will tell you what I can do." Sarah's expression flickered with hope. "I can recommend a good attorney who specializes in white-collar crime. And I can forgive you, not for your benefit, but for mine." "Forgive me?" she repeated, confusion evident. "Yes, not because you deserve it, and not because it erases what happened." Michael leaned forward slightly. "I forgive you because carrying anger and resentment only hurts me further. It gives you power over my life that you no longer deserve to have." Sarah stared at him, her calculated approach faltering in the face of unexpected compassion. "The truth, Sarah, is that our marriage was never real. It was a business transaction to you, but that doesn't mean you're not a real person with the capacity to make different choices." "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why aren't you bitter? Why would you help at all?" "Because treating you with dignity doesn't mean I have to invite you back into my life." Michael's eyes were kind but resolute. "Real relationships, not contracts, not transactions, are built on mutual authenticity, something neither of us had." Silence fell between them, the rain outside a gentle backdrop to this moment of truth. "I don't know how to live without manipulation," Sarah admitted finally, perhaps the first honest thing she had ever said to him. "That's where healing begins," Michael replied. "Not with me, but with you facing that truth." Sarah nodded slowly, a glimmer of genuine understanding in her eyes. Not remorse for being caught, but perhaps the first recognition of what she had truly lost. Not assets or security, but the possibility of authentic connection. "I'll call my attorney in the morning," Michael said. "The rest is up to you." 2 months later, Michael stood on his newly finished deck, morning coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold. The house was transformed, not just by the renovation projects he'd undertaken, but by the sense of peace that now permeated the space. The doorbell chimed softly. David arrived moments later, blueprints tucked under his arm. "Ready to look at the community center designs?" David asked, setting the plans on the outdoor table. "The committee loved your proposal for the financial literacy program." Michael smiled, feeling the warm satisfaction of purpose. After his own experience, helping others understand the warning signs of financial manipulation had become something of a mission. "You know," David said, studying his friend, "I haven't seen you this centered in years." "I'm not the same person I was," Michael replied. "Neither better nor worse, just more aware." As they reviewed the blueprints, Michael reflected on his journey. The pain had been real, the betrayal profound. But what had emerged wasn't bitterness or cynicism, rather a deeper understanding of what genuine connection meant. Life continued forward, not defined by contracts or transactions, but by authentic choice. New possibilities unfolded not because the past was erased, but because it had been integrated into a wisdom that could only come through struggle. Some wounds, when healed with dignity, became sources of unexpected strength. 1 year later, Michael stood at the edge of his garden, watching spring unfold around him. Young seedlings pushed through rich soil, tomatoes, herbs, and flowers that would bloom throughout the summer. The morning light filtered through apple blossoms overhead, casting dappled shadows across the earth he had cultivated with his own hands. So much had changed since that rainy evening when Sarah had appeared at his door. Her legal troubles had been resolved, a plea deal negotiated by the attorney he'd recommended, resulting in probation and restitution rather than prison time. He'd heard she was working at a small accounting firm in another state, starting over. He wished her well, genuinely, though their paths would never cross again. Michael knelt, pressing his fingers into the cool soil. There was something profoundly healing about nurturing growth, about participating in the ancient rhythm of planting and harvesting. The garden had become both meditation and metaphor, a living reminder that renewal follows devastation as surely as spring follows winter. "The soil looks good this year," came David's voice from the garden gate. "Better drainage than last season," Michael nodded, brushing dirt from his hands as he stood. Amazing what happens when you address the underlying problems instead of just treating symptoms. They shared a knowing smile at the double meaning. Michael had learned that lesson in the hardest possible way, that genuine healing required honest confrontation with pain rather than quick solutions or convenient denial. The financial literacy program he'd started at the community center had grown beyond expectations. Working with people who had survived various forms of financial exploitation had revealed a universal truth. The wound wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about trust, about reclaiming one's worth beyond what others assigned. "You know," Michael said as they walked toward the house, "I used to think that betrayal was the end of the story. Now I understand it was just the beginning of a different one." What he had learned couldn't be undone, nor would he wish it so. The pain had carved channels through which deeper wisdom now flowed. The capacity to distinguish between covenant and contract. The recognition that relationships built on mutual authenticity, while rarer, were infinitely more valuable than those built on performance or transaction. The experience had taught him to trust, not blindly, but wisely, to value his intuition when something felt wrong, to understand that his worth existed independent of others' validation or desire. and perhaps most importantly, that dignity wasn't found in avoiding wounds, but in how one healed from them. As he looked across his flourishing garden to the horizon beyond, Michael felt neither the naive optimism of his past nor the bitter cynicism that might have claimed him. Instead, he embraced a hard-won wisdom that life's deepest connections transcended paper promises, emerging instead from shared truth, vulnerability, and the courage to begin again.